Welcome to Well Partners on Predatory Marriage. My name is Jacqueline, and I am joined today by Daphne. This will be the final episode of our limited series on predatory marriage. Now, Daphne has been a longtime champion for better protections against predatory marriages. Over the past few episodes, we've talked about, why predatory marriages still exist, despite in Ontario, for example, marriage no longer revoking a will. We've talked about assumptions that are made, red flags and patterns that to potentially look out for. And today we're going to chat a bit more about a question Daphne has asked, which is, would this happen in Canada? So what happened to her mom? Would it happen here? Obviously, it's a little complicated with all the different provinces, so we'll talk a little bit about different similarities and differences. But first, I really just want your initial impressions and a yes or no. Would it happen here?
Sadly, yes, I'm sure it is happening. I think many of the provinces of Canada have a big advantage over most of the UK in that marriage doesn't revoke a will. And that takes away a lot of legal incentive. In the UK, if you marry, any previous will is just gone, and the predator would automatically inherit at least a large portion of the estate. And I think that's quite a simplistic way of looking at it. Of all the cases I've spoken to, I don't know, dozens and dozens and dozens. And they always keep the money. But I'm not convinced that that is absolutely at the heart of what it's about. I think it takes away, if you did have a simple financial predator who just thought, I'll marry this elderly person and get all the money, then that incentive of stopping marriage, revoking a will would sort it. But I think it won't sort it, even where the law has been changed, because I think at the base of all this is control. It's coercive control, it's undue influence, it's grooming, and it's gaslighting. So basically, you gaslight the family into thinking the whole world is wrong, somehow upside down. You do a lot of setting up that, the family are terrible. They just don't care about the old person. You do a lot of that. And you groom the old person. You say, your family don't care. It's so sad. Well, it's a shame, but don't worry, I'll look after you. And then you do look after them to a certain level, though quite honestly, nobody's quite sure how high that level is, because a lot of it goes on behind closed doors. And of course, with severe dementia, the person probably can't remember anyway. And then when you've done all that, you take them away and secretly marry them. And a lot of our predators' joy in this was not just about the money that he had inherited. It was about, I've scored one over the family. And I have to say, I have heard that story so many times. It's just that it's controlling both the old person and the kind of humiliation of the family at the same time. And that's what's awful. So it needs much better safeguarding. And one of the areas, of course, where the safeguarding is needed is at marriage. And that, I suspect, doesn't happen in the UK or in Canada in some occasions. In sometimes it will. Please don't think I'm blaming everyone. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm trying to just sort out the problem. And in the UK, both parties have to turn up to give notice of intention to marry in a civil ceremony or in a religious ceremony, quite honestly. And then you come back a few weeks later and you have the marriage ceremony, where, as I said in previous podcasts, you should again have some questions beforehand.
No,
Now I
actually,
know,
at that point, I have a question because
yeah,
that's something that varies between the UK and various provinces in Canada is
yeah,
the
does
standard timeline. Even between provinces, there's some variation in how long a marriage license, basically your permission to get married, is good for 30 days, 3 months, etc. And then also in whether or not you can get married the same day you get your license. So I'm wondering your thoughts on those timelines. Do you think any differences in what is or is not standard would have made a difference in your mom's case or in other cases you've seen?
I think in my mum's case, he took her as soon as he learnt that I had registered power of attorney, he took her off. He had, I know, asked her to marry him a couple of times before, and she'd always refused. But I think he just waited till she hadn't a clue what was going on. And he actually put in writing, "We did it anyway. That is not your mother said yes," So um, I think he in the UK, it's usually a few weeks. In my mother's case, I think it was about 4 weeks. Actually, 4 weeks is a long time in dementia, which is why I think it is a good thing to ask those questions again on the day of the wedding, because somebody's capacity might really have deteriorated over those 4 weeks. It might not be 4 weeks. I don't know how long um, the notification to marry lasts in the UK, but most people usually do it within a few weeks. I don't know what's the longest it would last. Um, but yeah, most people just do it in a few weeks. But if you just have to send one person, as I understand is the case in at least some parts of Canada, one person goes down to the office and gets a marriage license and then can marry the person shortly afterwards. It's such a glorious opportunity for predators, isn't it? Because you think, right, our chap, our predator, had all the information he needed for the marriage because he'd suddenly moved into mum's house and he had access to every drawer, every filing cabinet. He could get at everything. So it wasn't difficult for him to get the information together. It would have been hard for him. He must have been a bit nervous when he took mum down to give notification, but without having even to take her down. Wow, it's dead easy, isn't it? You just take your documents down and there's your notice to marriage done. And unless you therefore have very robust questions on the day of the wedding itself, it's just such an easy thing to do. And as I said, um, it is a lot of it is about control. And I'm aware that there are many predators just moving in on someone and emptying their bank account and all that. Oh, I'll look after your finances for you. There's a lot of that going on. And some of it is predatory sons and daughters. I must absolutely say that up front. But for a predatory marriage, I think the whole thing is it's money and it's power. I think that's what it's about.
Okay, so I'm getting that marriage revoking a will
Yeah.
may or may not make a difference, probably will make some, but
We'll make
it's not the
some.
only reason. So,
It will definitely make some because it's such an easy incentive, isn't it? It really is. With not much safeguarding at marriage, it's such an easy thing to do.
and then timelines, it's just one small piece of what happens. What's really important
Yes.
that when someone's actually getting married, somebody's checking in and checking that these people want to be there and have the capacity to be
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. In separate rooms, see them separately. I know I've said it in a previous podcast. Sometimes you can identify a predatory marriage simply by seeing the couples separately. And I know that in the registrar's handbook, which is the same as the officiants in Canada, um, it says you should see them in separate rooms, but it really needs to say you must. And there'll be consequences if you don't. Not necessarily to the registrars, because it's not their fault, but there need to be some accountability. And at the time of my mum's wedding, there really wasn't.
Now, at that note, where it is required in some places in Canada is for people to have to go into separate rooms when
Yeah,
they both come to pick up the license. Now,
right.
and once you have that license, depending on where you are, I can't remember the timeline for the places that have it that you have to go into separate rooms. But across Canada, the timeline for how long that license is valid, I think ranges from around 30 days to 3 months. Do you
Right.
think that there needs to be some kind of additional separate conversation happening at the wedding day if there's that long that the
I
like
think so,
for it?
definitely. Definitely, especially if it's 3 months, because again, someone could be perfect, could have capacity to marry, just when they turn up to pick up the marriage license, but they could have lost it completely in 3 months. Uh, it depends on the kind of dementia. And I know that Alzheimer's disease can fluctuate. The level of capacity can go like this. Um, Even so, I would argue that you shouldn't assess it as a snapshot. Okay, they were fine in this 5 minutes. It really needs a medical assessment over time. Um, and in the kind of dementia my mum had, which is vascular dementia, that is known to go on a steady downhill slope on a series of little steps, often mini strokes, and my mum had quite a few of them. But it was always downhill. It never went uphill. It never went back. So if you'd have taken, if you'd have taken 3 months from my mum saying one thing to another, her capacity would definitely have diminished in that time.
So in your ideal world, because we identify changing or revoking a will doesn't necessarily mean it wouldn't happen here.
Yeah,
Having the marriage license require two separate interviews doesn't necessarily mean it won't happen here, though both of those things would help.
they would help.
Putting in
Yeah,
the requirement to speak to them separately the day they're actually getting married, that might help
absolutely.
even more. What else would you like to see in an ideal world happen so that you could feel more confident saying the answer is no, it wouldn't have happened here?
More training for people conducting weddings. Absolutely, more training. What would you look out for when somebody's, well, for example, what would you look out for when somebody hasn't got capacity to marry? Because what does that mean? I don't think anyone's ever clarified what exactly would they be able to do and to say. And the other thing is, what are you looking for in the predator? What would make you worried that this might be a predator? And I would say a huge amount of charm, a lot of over friendliness, a kind of, oh, I really love this person, a lot of that. Um, they are very, very convincing. And of course, that doesn't mean that they're not a genuine couple, but those are things I would look out for. One party dominating the other. My mum hardly ever spoke at the time she got married. She would try and get a few words out and then go, oh, the hole in my head, the hole in my head, and then stop. Even if it's, and she didn't have capacity at that time to, well, she couldn't have made a cup of tea. She didn't even have capacity to accept a cup of tea. Would you like a cup of tea, Mum? You could just see no information. She just couldn't retain the information long enough to make that very simple decision. And there is that thing you need to be able to understand the information, weigh it up, come to a decision, and communicate that decision at marriage. That is capacity for decisions, isn't it? And if you're going to have that, then you should check all of those things. And at the moment, they're not checked at marriage.
Now, something that has been discussed somewhat is, what test does exist for capacity? You said it's not really clear. And honestly, for anyone who's just Googling it, they would have no clue because it's not
Not a
written
clue.
in the law anywhere. It's kind of developed through common law. And it's basically to enter into a contract, to kind of get your responsibilities and what's going to happen. It's a kind of low standard. Um,
Yeah.
Especially in places where weirdly it still might revoke a will. So
Yeah.
it's making its consequences doing something you otherwise wouldn't have capacity to be able to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In my humble, not even a lawyer yet opinion. Um, so, what do you think that standard should be? That's a weighty question to throw at you. But I would just love to hear your thoughts. And it can be a brainstorming, it can be a dialogue. Just what do you think about the standard?
Well, don't forget, I'm not a lawyer either, but I am putting the layperson's view because often lawyers know the law, but sometimes that can blinker them from almost seeing the bigger picture. They can get bogged down in the legal detail. Whereas anybody who knew my mum went, don't be ridiculous. Of course, she wasn't fit to marry. She couldn't accept a cup of tea. So that is one thing. Um, what would I like to see? I would like to see some robust procedures, some same list of questions everywhere, um, and um, yeah, obviously the marriage revoking a will to have gone that would really help. But the registrars need to know what they're looking for. I think that's the thing, and at the moment they don't. And at the moment, quite honestly, some of the solicitors we've come across didn't, because I know solicitors tend to specialise too. So you can't assume that just because somebody's legally trained, they know.
So I guess one of the biggest parts of the definition of capacity to marry for you is people just have to be able to know what it is.
Well, actually, I'm not so sure about. I don't think registrars, more training for registrars in what to look out for would be good, but I don't think training registrars to assess capacity it is fair because, as I say, it's such a big decision, isn't it? Weddings. If you marry someone, you're giving somebody so many rights that I think what registrars need to know is what to look out for, when to stop a wedding, and how to do it. That's what they need to know.
Okay. So this brings our last podcast episode to a conclusion. But is there any kind of final comment you want to throw out there, Daphne?
Yeah, this needs to be solved before, or solved to our utmost ability before we all get older, because we're all getting older and the number of people with dementia is rocketing, and these procedures have just not kept up with the rise. And I want to say again, not blaming any individual or any group, but the procedures need to change around marriage to safeguard our vulnerable elderly. And thank you so much for taking the time to interview me for these podcasts.
Okay. Now that brings us to the formal end of our podcast for today and for this limited series on predatory marriages. For any future podcasts from Well Partners, I encourage everyone listening to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to your podcasts. For now, stay safe and stay well.